So this is a quick video looking at the issue with surveys and human research for your inquiry action project. As I mentioned in my feedback to some of your IAP ideas, the guidelines for the IAP specify that for this project you should be looking at your community members as collaborators rather than as research subjects. And that means refraining from formally surveying or interviewing people. Instead, trying to work with them, incorporating them into your project, but answering questions that are not about them. From a philosophical perspective, that makes sense because we talk a lot about community engagement. And in that sense, it is better for us to be sharing knowledge than measuring what people know, or it is better for us to be changing people's attitudes and values through inquiry rather than trying to measure what those attitudes and values are at present. And then there's also this mentality of we are members of our communities, right? We are not this scientist that is coming from outside and trying to look at what people are doing. We're not the anthropologists, looking at a distance, but we're actually participants the same as other people in the community. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to think in that particular way. Now, that sometimes can be at odds with what you guys say in your master plan, since many times you talk about how you are trying to make change happen in your communities, right? And so how can we tell that we made any change happen if we are not measuring changes in attitudes and values and so on? Well, there's several ways that you can look at that. And for example, you can look at participation level in activities or events, which would be, looking at how many people are willing to participate or coming over, just looking at those plain numbers. You can also talk about changes in outcomes. For example, if you start a project at your work and then you can measure, whether people are using recycling bins more than they used to before, or they're producing less trash over time. That's something you can talk about. There's also just the changes in practices that come as a result of the community being engaged and talking to people in power or coming up with new ways of doing things together. And then finally, you can also use quotes from participants in your project, from collaborators, without engaging in a formal survey. You can have conversations with people, and that's perfectly fine. And then you can take small quotes from that and include them into your papers, just to give a sample of what members in your community are thinking about as they engage in your project. And this is actually mentioned in the guidelines for the IAP. We actually said what are their ideas throughout this co-created process. In that sense, you're incorporating what they're thinking, but not as something that is meant to be extended or generalized to a larger population like you would in research. And there's also the issue with IRB that has something to do with this. The IRB process is typically lengthy. It has several steps and that require approval through someone in Project Dragonfly and then someone at the IRB office at the university, and you might have to be making changes to your work until it is exactly right, and that takes time. And the issue with that is that you can't collect any data until you have approval. What that means then is, actually collecting data it might be delayed beyond what would be something we can work with within the time that we have for the course. Then there's also the fact that if you're going to go through all that trouble, you probably should have a really well-defined hypothesis, a well-defined methodology, good experimental design, large sample sizes, and so on. And many times your projects are pretty good as far as those issues, but the scope that you're looking at, it's kind of limited just because we don't have a lot of time. And so the effort that you put into it, that you would put into going through the IRB process, many times is not worth it for a project that is only going to be 1 semester. And then, there might be the rare exception where you really strongly believe that a project that is more formal and that looks at either human subjects or, in different case, does experimental work with vertebrates, you think that it's really worth it for your master plan or your personal goals, or there's specific reasons why you want to do this, and you are aware and willing to deal with the additional work and delays, then we can talk about it, and we can consider that possibility of going through the IRB process. But for the most part, you can come up with a perfectly good IAP without doing this. And many of you guys already have ideas that work pretty well, and the rest of you are clearly working on that. So with that, I'll just say thank you guys for watching, and let's keep on working. The semester is going. If you have questions or comments, I'll read them in the workshop, and I'll see you online. Bye.